Metal breaks when you bend it. It snaps. And they're not fun to put back together. So just take your time, use screwdriver, tweezers, whatever tool you need to. You take advantage of the hard plastic piece they have at the end there, and just try to handle it from that plastic piece. Don't try to bend the wire too much, or the ribbon too much. Use your fingernails, use whatever you can. This one's giving me trouble, but I'll get it in. And it's lined up. Good to go. And we have one more over there. All the ribbon cables are in place. Those 2 wires are in place. Let's flip it around. Screw it back together. There's my pile of screws, which isn't really a problem because, like I said, on Toshibas, they'll label their screw holes. So you have like F6, F3, F5, where those numbers, I believe, stand for millimeters. Now, don't over-tighten these screws. Just tighten them so they're snug. You'll find that that's plenty tight. You never know when you have to open these again. If you over-tighten every screw, it's not a fun thing. And definitely get a screwdriver that has a magnetized tip. That tip on that screwdriver, I magnetize every once in a while when it loses its charge. You just take a strong magnet and take that screwdriver and just run it over the magnet. It charges it right up. Or get a lodestone, which we recently have in the shop. I haven't used it yet, but you could use that as well. Get that CD drive in. It should fit in flush, and you should see, looking down at that hole on the top of the computer, you should see the screw hole that you have to screw into. If you don't, just make sure nothing's obstructing it, which I think something is right now. Inspect it. It's a little out of view, but I'm just basically making sure there's nothing obstructing the CD hole, the CD drive slot. And then there's usually like 1 or 2 screws that hold it in. Screw right in from the bottom, they hold the CD drive in. This one only has 1 screw holding it in. That's all it really needs. Hook the modem back in. Not that anybody uses dial-up anymore, but I guess we got to do it for a while. We can start putting the plates, or getting the dust out of there, if there's any residual dust, and start putting the plates and the memory back on. Really dusty. Dust off that plate. Use the old paintbrush. Get it nice and clean. Just making sure there was no screws I missed before I put this plate on. Sometimes there's screws under these plates, and if you put the plate on, you got to unscrew it all again if you find out you're missing a screw. Not in this case. Gonna get the hard drive back in there, dust it off first. This hard drive is extra dusty, so I'm going to take a can of compressed air and just blast it a little bit. Make sure all the dust is out of that hard drive. There it is. Get all the dust out of the connector there. Make sure the connection's clear. Since you have it apart, you might as well do these things. It only takes a second. And then put it in the right way, which that is not. There we go. And then you'll see on the underside of that plate, that is this. There's a piece of plastic that holds the hard drive in place. So with that one screw, you just hold everything in place. Okay, keep the battery out. I don't like to put the battery in until I'm completely done. Let's throw the screen on now. Get all the dust out from where those hinges are. They get a little dusty under there. Just going to dust the whole screen off while I have it out. Then I'll hit it with a monitor wipe after the whole thing's done. I like to give the computers back in better condition than they gave them to me, so that's always a good policy to follow. Okay, and then take the 4 screws for the screen. Screw them in. Okay. Now you want to make sure you get that LCD connector in. Now be careful. Those LCD connections have about 30 cables, 30 small wires coming out of them. So just make sure you're a little careful when you do that. Make sure it fits in properly. You don't want to push that connector into the slot the wrong way because there's about 30 pins that you could bend. So just make sure. Put pressure on both sides evenly. And then reroute the wireless cable. Antenna, actually. Just put the wireless card in. Clean out that card and make sure clean out the connector. Oh yeah, another thing I like to do is on screen, the screws that hold the screen in. I like to take a big screwdriver and give them a little extra torque because those are the screws on laptops that come loose the fastest. So just make sure the screen's on tight. And you clean out the connector of the wireless jack, wireless port. Snap it in. Reattach the antennas. Okay, now we got that in there. Just make sure that it's clearing all the corners. You want to have that flush. You don't want any of those wires popping out because the keyboard it's sitting on top of that. So you want to have that basically below the surface, those wires below the surface, so there's no lumps when you put the keyboard on. You don't want the keyboard sitting on any lumps. Everything looks like it's in place there. Time to put the keyboard back on. Dust it off. Be careful you don't damage the ribbon cable on the back of the keyboard. Dusting it. And attach the ribbon cable first. Should slide right in there. Just make sure that that's in there. Sometimes that's tricky. It could barely be in there. Like there. I wasn't 100% sure it was in, so just pull it out and reattach it. Make sure it's in there 100%. And then screw the keyboard back in. It's usually only held in by 2 small or 4 small screws. Put the plate back on. This plate is, I've talked about it before, this plate is the key. A lot of people who try to take apart laptops don't know that that plate has to come off to get the keyboard and the screen off. It's the key to getting the whole thing apart. Make sure it's all snapped back in the way it was. There's those 2 screws in the back we're going to put in. Yeah, we're just about done. Roughly 40 minutes to do this repair. Okay. Let's hook that power adapter in. Power it up. It would have been wise, I've said this before, it would have been wise to test this computer before we put it entirely back together.